Yeah, my name is Simon Bennett. I'm the co-CEO at Roll7.
John Ribbons, and I'm creative director at Roll7.
So you guys can talk about for people who don't know, what is OlliOlli World?
OlliOlli World is an action platformer. It's a mix of an exploration platformer and a score-chasing combo game that's fundamentally a love letter to skateboarding set in a crazy, weird island called Radlandia, where everything is kind of based around skateboarding. Everything from the streets to the trees are skatable.
Can we talk about like the art design? The game has a very interesting, simplistic visual style. Can you talk about how that came about?
Sure. Okay, there's a couple of different angles. So one is move the game into 3D from OlliOlli 2, and overall we wanted the game to have this kind of more welcoming vibe. Like we wanted it to be a more welcoming game to approach, both in terms of gameplay and the world that we were creating. And so even when we were coming like in ideation for this, we were like, we want the game to look like a cartoon about skateboarding. And so although that art style has changed, it's always kind of been in this idea of like making a wicked skate cartoon that you're playing. And I guess over the course of trying to make this a friendly place with like cool characters that you want to get to know and an environment that you kind of want to go off and explore, that's kind of where it's grown into being weirder and sort of trippier as we've gone along. It definitely fits with like the way that the levels work anyway. Our levels are kind of weird and twisty, and we've got loads of different height and verticality to it, hidden paths and stuff like that. And so having this kind of fantastical, strange world that you're skateboarding in really lends itself to the architecture of the levels. Simon, anything to add?
You nailed it, boy.
Okay, I nailed it.
Can you guys talk about what being skaters in real life brings to the development table? Because I mean, for example, there are developers and coders that know about football or soccer or sports games, but they may not play sports games. But in this case, you guys actually do skate.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks, Greg. I think this is a really interesting one. John used to be a sponsored skater when he was younger, and we've got members on the team now who are ex-proper professional skateboarders, and people who've just picked it up, and people who used to do it, and the whole gamut. People who are just getting into it. And I think the thing with OlliOlli is when we started making the original OlliOlli back in 2013. We'd not skated for a while. We were in our early 30s. Our knees were starting to give way, and we were like, meh, like not necessarily skating that much. Although John and I originally bonded over, skate culture and like a whole ton of those sort of things back in the day. And with OlliOlli, we started making this game, and then we're like, oh, we should get some merch. We should make some skateboarding decks. Oh, I might brush off my old skateboarding deck. Let's bring that into the office, and then we're like, oh, can I still ollie? Oh, can I still shove it? And then suddenly we're out skating at lunch, and fast forward 6 years, and I've got back into skateboarding, albeit novelty skateboarding for someone who's 40, with electric skateboards and like weird surf stimulator craft and all of these bits. And John's taken it a bit more seriously, and it's ended up sort of shaping a lot of his sort of social circles, and he runs an Instagram on skating and spots and things like that. And I think OlliOlli has essentially got us back into skateboarding, which is insane. And I think OlliOlli World is our having been hyped back onto skateboarding with our own game. OlliOlli World is our love letter back to skateboarding, to be like, look, thank you for being so inclusive and amazing, and this wonderful thing that anyone can just pick up and do. And it's a beautifully creative medium, and it's a wonderful and diverse and very different sort of subculture to the one that John and I grew up with in the 90s.
So why do you think that skateboarding seems to be making more of a return in the last few years? I mean, obviously we had, the Tony Hawk franchise kind of fell out, and we had some experimental skateboarding games that never fell through. I'm thinking that one with the with the board you leaned on. I can't remember what it was called.
Wide.
Yeah, right. Like we've seen a lot of people experiment stuff, but they kind of fell through. In these last couple of years, we've seen things like skateboard and people asking relentlessly about Skate 4. And now with your OlliOlli World, like, why do you think skating, and specifically in gaming, has made such a resurgence these last 2 or 3 years?
I think in general, it's made a resurgence in the real world, right? Like skateboarding in the last sort of 6-7 years, you had like stuff like Street League, I think, really tried to push it. And there's like ETN, which is a sports channel based around that. All of that kind of tried to push skateboarding. And I think in doing that, like it moving towards being an Olympic sport as well, has meant a lot more people have kind of taken an interest in it. It's been awesome as well that I think a lot more, like the people who are involved in skateboarding is a lot more diverse. There are a lot more women in skateboarding. I think Street League and like Dew Tour and so on, having to have men's and women's and televising both of those kind of made it a more inclusive space for people to kind of look at it and go like, oh, I could go and do that. And I think it's become something that a lot more people feel like they can get involved in. I also wonder whether it's because there's a whole bunch of people, like we're all nodding along. There's plenty of people at the company who skateboarded as teenagers and got back into it in their 30s. And I think there's a lot of people who are older now who used to skate who are like, that was really fun, I'm going to get back into it. And maybe they've got kids or whatever who they're going to bring along to the skate park and get them involved in it as well. And I think that's generally maybe made it more inclusive because there's a bigger age range of people hanging out in the scene, and there's a much more diverse range of people who are getting into skating, supporting it, starting skate companies, and so I think that bleeds across into games. Like there's a wider market of people who are doing it in the real world, so it kind of, I think that's why people are coming to make games about it, because there's an audience of people who are interested in, a bigger audience of people who are interested in the sport. Wow, I made that sound really commercial at the end there, didn't I? As a bigger audience, we should make another skateboarding game.
Yeah, we sat down and looked at the data, and really, no, I'm kidding.
Our focus groups tested and said people love skateboarding. We did it.
And they said we need a platformer and a skateboarding game hybrid, please.
Can you guys talk about, obviously there's the difference between your skateboarding game and a lot of other ones is yours has an immersive world, characters, and a story. Can you talk about those 3 things in your game specifically?
Yeah, sure. I think when we look at the previous 2 games that we did, like in OlliOlli 1 and 2, like we were really gameplay focused. And I think, when we went back and looked at those games before we came into making the new one, a lot of people kind of said the game felt cold. Like it was fun, but it felt cold. And that was something we really wanted to address with like OlliOlli World, and kind of being like stuff like challenges or beating the high score, or even like while you're navigating around the world. We wanted that to be like a face instead of a little text box, right? Everything should be presented by a character in the world who's going to explain that thing to you and then encourage you to do it. So we kind of like personified the elements of the metagame instead of them just being pop-up boxes. So a lot of the game world grows out of that, right? Like this idea that like we want, I guess, to look at, and I don't want to like knock other skate games, but a lot of the time it can feel like you're kind of skating in the apocalypse. Like all of the other people on the planet have disappeared. It's just you in downtown LA doing wicked kickflip crooks on your own. And it was like, I'd like it to be a world where it feels like all the other people, there's loads of other people in this space. Some of them maybe aren't humans, some of them are mushrooms walking around, or like ice cream people or whatever, but like that it's like an interesting world to explore, and it feels like a world that's alive, not just this kind of like dead space that's entirely dedicated to just you skating around it.
Sam, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think like it's something that we explored really heavily in Not a Hero, and I think we were developing OlliOlli 2 in conjunction, at the same time in parallel with Not a Hero. And we had so much fun with Not a Hero, with like the very varied and strange cast of characters that you met or you became along the way there. And I think feeding that into OlliOlli, but instead of it being, a murderous rampage around parts of London, like you're actually doing something wholesome, and we're sharing some slightly more worldly wisdom and themes for potentially a younger audience, but then also with a cheeky wink to some slightly more not necessarily adult material, but
grown-up themes.
Thank you. Grown-up feels. Yeah, just like I think having that all in one place, it's quite nice because sometimes it takes you, it catches you off guard, or there's just an interesting sentiment. I think for me, Chiffon, our skate wizard character, really embodies that. Like there's lots of like Buddhist references and like random life advice that I think is just really cool to also have in a weird and wacky skateboarding game. So yeah, I think adding heart to the game is really something that we like never necessarily had the time, the budget, or inclination to be able to do. But now that we've injected it in, it's like, oh my god, I can't imagine an OlliOlli without this. I can't imagine it being anything other than what it is right now. So yeah.
Your game is kind of like 2.5D. Was like you specifically mentioned not a hero. Did the conversation come up to make the game pixel 2D at any time? Is that how did it originally start? Was it always going to be a 3D game, or did it originally start out as a pixel art 2D game?
100% wanted to move it into 3D ASAP. I think like we obviously took a break from OlliOlli for quite a while, and as a studio learned a lot about how to make games, how to make bigger games, how to make 3D games, and really a big part of the decision to come back to it was kind of looking at the skills we've developed and like what we know about making games and going, I think we could do a really great, even better, like we could do justice to a new version of OlliOlli because we've grown and because of what we've learned. And like although obviously like the gameplay is 2D because you're going left to right and you don't have complete freedom of movement, the world itself is still 3D, right? And as the game goes on and the levels get more complicated, you are moving in kind of all the axis. It's not just A to B, up and down. Classic platformer fare.
So Simon, as the studio founder, did COVID affect the development of this game at all? Were you guys pretty much on schedule during the epidemic or pandemic?
Yeah. So Roll 7 has been we've been running for 13 years, and for the last 6 years we've been a remote first studio. It was a decision that we made during the development of Not a Hero. John was just basically saved like 3 hours on his commute and was like, look guys, if I don't come to the office, I can just spend 3 more hours working on the game. So we're like, okay, cool. And then moving forwards, we actually just moved the entire studio to being distributed, and it's something that we sort of pioneered here in the UK. And I guess when the pandemic hit, we were affected because normally we would be meeting up every fortnight, but thankfully, the team was already working in a remote way. I think the only thing that has been affected is just, it's been really odd. Like there's been a ton of amazing people on the team who we've not met in person. And yeah, we're looking forward to doing that all next week in London anyway. So yeah, I think like broadly speaking, we've been okay and not affected too much by it. We've just not been able to hug each other, which is something that, we do a lot as a studio, a lot of hugging.
It's a very loving place. I like it.
Yeah.
There are things that don't really transcend, internationally, but skateboarding is one of those rare things. Why do you think that is? And Simon, you can chime in on that as well too. I mean, it's an international thing. People recognize it anywhere. People do it all over the world. I mean, it's, for example, like American football is only popular in America, right? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like stuff as opposed to something like that.
I'll kick off with a very quick, like my simple. I think it and it's a really boring answer. But it's I think like the size of a skateboard and the cost of a skateboard, it's a low entry point. It allows you to do a lot of stuff. It's quite cheap. They can be quite cheap. Yeah, skateboards can be quite expensive, but mainly they're quite cheap. And like broadly speaking, skateboarding is quite cool, and has been. It's obviously sort of varied in throughout the decades with just how cool it is, but I think that lends itself to it's a mode of transport, but it's also it's a way of expressing yourself, like a
lifestyle, right?
Yeah, I think there's that wider culture to it, which is like skateboarding for me isn't just the act of pushing yourself down a hill. It's the shirt you put on your back. It's the trainers that you wear. And I think we've seen, some of these brands have transcended skateboarding into just mainstream culture. And I wear a pair of Vans, and I haven't skate, but I know my wife does as well. She doesn't skate, and it's just, I think it's become part of mainstream culture, skateboarding, and I think anyone can just get on and do it, right? And I don't think, especially now, like there's no, it's lost its macho male orientated focus that I think came out of the 80s. That very much like, come on, bro! Like it's become a far more diverse beast. So I'm sure John's got some way better philosophical things to talk about. Come on, John.
Oh, that's too much pressure. And I'm sorry to anyone who really likes American football, but American football requires, I think, at least two. Like, it's a bit like throwing a baseball. If I throw a baseball and there's no one to catch it, then I'm just throwing a ball and then going and picking it up. Whereas like a skateboard, like day one, if you give someone a skateboard and they go to the top of a hill or a slope, you don't even need to be able to push. You can just sit on it and roll down a hill, and that is fucking cool. Like, it feels great. You go really fast, you go down a hill, and you're like, I want to immediately pick it up and run back to the top of the hill and sit on it and go back down again. I don't necessarily think it's cool, because cool's subjective and has definitely changed over the years, right? It was really not cool for a really long time, and it goes up and down. It's definitely fun though. Like no matter whether someone thinks you're cool on a skateboard or not, like sitting on it, going really fast is really fun. All of the stuff you can do afterwards, jumping over things or down things, or like crazy manual tricks where you balance stuff, all of that is entirely up to you, whether you want to put yourself through the challenge of learning to do all of those things. But what's been really interesting with people in the team picking it up is there's a lot of people who've never skated before on our team who are like, I'm just going to buy a skateboard because it seems like quite good. And like for them, just standing on it, going down a hill, it's like, that feels great. That's just a really cool thing. I don't need anybody else. It's just me and a board, and I can go down a hill. And I think, there's videos of like various pros going to really remote places, right? Taking boards, and they're on a dirt road somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and there's some kids run up because they're just interested in what the thing is, and they sit or stand on it, roll down the hill, and have a great time, massive smile on their face. And I think maybe that's where it transcends it.
Awesome. And then the last question I have is, what are you most excited about for people to experience with OlliOlli World?
Go on.
I'm excited for them to get into the flow. I'm excited for them to find that moment where they everything just clicks. They nail that line that's maybe taken them a few goes, and like they just feel like a badass, right? That's what this game is ultimately about, is that they feel like they did something really cool. And yeah, I want them to have a warm and fuzzy feeling when they do that.
I think we should start how we ended it. Si, you nailed it.